Hi everyone, my name's Caroline, and today I'm going to be talking about subduction angle and its role on magmas and igneous rocks. To start, here is a brief overview of my presentation and the topics that I will be covering, including a brief overview of subduction zones, a deeper look at the production of thermal gradients within the mantle wedge of subduction zones, their associated metamorphic facies and the metasomatic processes, and then finishing off with a look at flat slab subduction and comparing this to high angle subduction. Through doing this, we will be able to see the high variability that exists in subduction zones, along with the factors that affect them, mainly focusing on subduction angle. By the end of this presentation, we will understand that subduction angle plays a significant role in this and has a strong ability to produce various facies within the mantle wedge, as well as different landforms on the surface of the Earth. By now, I'm pretty sure that we all have a general idea of what a subduction zone is. It's where the collision of two plates has resulted in one of these plates being forced beneath the other as a result of the discrepancy in densities. When this occurs, many unique things can be seen happening to the minerals in both the mantle and the subducted crust, which I will be speaking a little bit about today. In this presentation, I will be primarily focusing on oceanic continental subduction zones, even though we do see other types of subduction zones occurring in nature. This diagram displayed on the slide displays the evolution of a subducting crust, including the location of eclogitized crust, which will be explained a little bit later more in depth, and is a very important aspect of subduction zones. In this diagram, we see the subducting oceanic crust going beneath the continental crust and into the mantle. This diagram displays some seismic activity, as well as the overall motion and the mafic arc magnetism that is often produced at subduction zones. There are several important factors that govern the thermal conditions that exist within the mantle wedge. The mantle wedge, as demonstrated by the last diagram and in this diagram, is the slice of the mantle that is overriding the subducting crust. The factors that affect the thermal structure within this mantle wedge are the rate of plate convergence, the age of descending slabs, the subduction dip angle, which we'll talk a bit more about, the property of the mantle wedge, and the efficiency of shear heating at the slab-mantle interface. Each of these factors will result in variation in the thermal gradient that is produced within the mantle wedge, and therefore the metamorphic processes that are able to take place within the wedge. There are 5 main variations in thermal gradients that are seen within the mantle wedge at subduction zones. These 5 variations range from ultra cold to ultra hot. Ultra cold being less than 5 degrees per kilometer, and ultra hot being greater than 60 degrees Celsius per kilometer. There is quite a range in these gradients in oceanic continental subduction zones, as they are known to possess a lot of variation spanning from ultra cold to ultra hot. This is dictated by both the rate of convergence and the thickness of the overlying plate. Associated with each of these thermal gradients is certain metamorphic facies. For example, associated with the ultra-cold facies is the blue schist and eclogite facies, and minerals such as glaucophane, lawsonite, and zoisite, which are all hydrous minerals, while with the ultra-hot facies, associated with this is the green schist, amphibolite, and granulite facies. Apart from thermal gradient, another very important parameter when thinking about the metamorphic processes that occur within the mantle wedge, it is quite obvious to think about the pressure. In subduction zones, we typically either see high pressure, denoted by HP, or ultra high pressure, UHP, zones, and their associated metamorphic facies. On the slide are some of the associated facies and minerals for both HP and UHP. An important distinction on this graph and in general between the two is the existence of quartz versus coesite. Coesite is a polymorph of quartz that forms under UHP conditions and is indicative of the transition from HP. In fact, the HP and UHP can be separated by this equilibrium. This distinction between HP and UHP is helpful in determining the type of subduction zones that have formed such rocks. UHP is typically associated with pressures greater than 2.7 GPa and temperatures greater than 600 degrees Celsius. The eclogites that form above this coesite quartz boundary are called hot eclogites, while those that form below are called cold eclogites. Mineral dehydration and metasomatism are two very important mechanisms to think of when we think about metamorphic processes that are occurring within the mantle wedge at subduction zones. To start, we start with mineral dehydration, which is the process through which aqueous fluids are released from the subducting slab into the mantle wedge. This release of H2O from the subducting crust initially begins due to mechanical processes in the forearc, but this then proceeds via chemical dehydrations at much greater depths. Metasomatism refers to the process whereby a pre-existing igneous sedimentary or metamorphic rock is chemically, compositionally, and mineralogically altered by these metasomatic fluids, or these fluids released via dehydration. Metasomatism is most widely accepted as the explanation for the production of volcanic arc magmatism via these H2O fluids emanating from the subducting slab. These processes vary in location along the slab mantle boundary depending on the thermal regime of the slab as well as the subduction angle. Evidence of metasomatism includes metasomatic rinds, the existence of fluid inclusions, and veins. Rinds develop during fluid interactions under HP or UHP conditions and provide a clear fingerprint for the geochemical alteration that has occurred. Fluid inclusions are often associated with peak metamorphism and can be directly assessed to understand the conditions under which they formed. The example shown to the right here on the slide demonstrates the deserpentization or dehydration reaction of serpentine in a mantle wedge in Almarez. Veining is a direct representation of fluid movement. They can either be representative of mass fluid movement through an environment or of smaller movement of liquid through pre-existing cracks and cleavages. Now we are going to get into the impact of the angle of subduction on the igneous rocks and magma present in subduction zones. Flat slab subduction and high angle subduction are the two opposite ends of the subduction spectrum, and there are of course intermediate angles of subduction between this. Flat slab subduction possesses an angle of around 10 degrees or less, while high angle subduction is 70 degrees or greater. More often, we see subduction that occurs at around intermediate angles of around 30, but these two opposite ends of the spectrum produce unique environments that we will now take a deeper look at. First, we have flat slab subduction, which takes up around 10% of the subduction zones around the world and is currently a very active area of study. As stated in the previous slide, flat slab subduction is associated with very low angles of dip, typically being less than 10 degrees. It is not currently understood how low angle subduction is initiated, but it is understood that we can have normal subduction transform into flat slab subduction and vice versa. An example of flat slab subduction is the present-day subduction of the Nazca Plate in South America. The thermal regime associated with flat slab subduction is the cold thermal regime, of being around 5 to 10 degrees Celsius per kilometer and generally possessing HP metamorphism or high pressure metamorphism. HP metamorphism is associated with various facies such as blue schist, eclogite, and granulite facies, and importantly, quartz, the mineral, not yet coesite because we do not have UHP. The mechanics of low angle subduction are complex, and we will now be taking a look at the flat slab subduction of the Pacific Plate under the North American Plate in Alaska to better understand flat slab subduction. Demonstrated by this diagram is the flat slab subduction that is occurring in Alaska. An important process in the production of flat slab is eclogitization, which is the process through which the dense eclogite facies is formed. Associated with flat slab subduction is a cold thermal regime, which means that hydrous minerals, such as those a part of the blue schist facies, remain stable for much longer. So, colder conditions favor hydrous mineral phases, which are typically less dense than anhydrous mineral phases like that of the eclogite facies. The transition from the blue schist facies to the eclogite facies in this case does not occur until 500 kilometers inland from the trench. This means that the slab remains less dense and buoyant on top of the mantle for an extended distance. It is not until 500 kilometers inland that we see the process of eclogitization occur, and the slab begin to sink because of the change in density of the slab here when we turn into the eclogite facies. Due to the expansive distances that flat slab subduction covers, we are often able to see common structures occurring on the surface of the Earth that provide evidence that flat slab subduction is occurring. Examples of these would be mountain building and volcanism as far as 600 kilometers inland from the trench, as well as the production of ore bodies. An interesting piece of evidence that is common at flat slab subduction zones is adiabatic magma, which is andesitic and dacitic magma, and these provide possible evidence of slab melt, which is the melt of the actual oceanic slab that is being subducted. At flat slab subduction zones, we have the ability to produce temperature and pressure conditions necessary for fusion of moderately old oceanic crust. And at most of the flat slab subduction zones we are aware of in the world, we do see evidence of adiabatic magma. Moving on from flat slab subduction, we will now be taking a look at high-angle subduction. Associated with high-angle subduction are UHP facies, which in this case is eclogite, and importantly the mineral coesite. The Stromboli volcano in this case is a result of the high subduction angle of around 70 degrees and is unique in that it has highly variable geochemical diversity of its magmas. As shown by this diagram, this volcano has formed as a result of the Ionian Oceanic Plate being subducted beneath the Calabria Plate. Steep angle subduction results when the subduction of a cooler oceanic plate triggers small-scale convection within the mantle wedge, which contributes to the uncoupling of the mantle from the slab, in turn producing high-angle subduction. The high angle of subduction that is present in Calabria has resulted in high geochemical diversity of magma through the superimposition of the metasomatizing agents of the two enrichment processes in the same volume of the mantle wedge. It also means that dehydration reactions can occur at much greater depths along the mantle slab boundary. This superimposition occurs due to the fact that there are two stages in which supercritical fluids and aqueous fluids escape the slab, which in turn mix in the mantle wedge, producing immense variety in the magmas produced by the Stromboli volcano. The first stage involves the release of supercritical fluids of the basalt and sediment slab. This melting of the slab can occur at depths greater than 150 kilometers along the subduction zone. At depths less than 150 kilometers, dehydration of the hydrous minerals contained within the crust occurs. This releases aqueous fluids into the mantle wedge from the basaltic and sedimentary rocks that later get melted themselves. This release of aqueous fluids into the mantle wedge is critical to lowering the solidus and producing the resultant melt. In the mantle, the products of the two stages mix with the mantle wedge, producing highly variable magma types. The magma types seen at this location range between those that are calc-alkaline to high potassium calc-alkaline and potassic alkaline magmas. So, overall, in high-angle subduction regions, we see the production and mixing of different fluids in the mantle wedge that intermix as a result of being formed along a steep gradient, which has in turn resulted in a wide variety of the types of magmas produced by the volcano. And finally, here is a short summary of my presentation and some of the key points that I went over. I hope that you were able to see the extreme variation and subduction zones and the processes and structures that we see as a result of them, both in low angle and high angle subduction, as well as intermediate subduction angles. Subduction is an important process that happens all over the world, and the variation that can be captured by subduction zones is incredibly important to acknowledge so that we can understand a wide variety of processes. Thank you for listening.